All right. Take one deep breath. And then I want to think a little bit more about the differences and the sameness, I will say, between Jacob and his brother Esau. So Jacob and Esau are traditionally painted as drastically different characters. The rabbis emphasize these differences from the very moment of their conception. Chapter 25, verse 22 reads that while Rebekah was pregnant, Vayitrotzitzu habanim bekirba, the children struggled in her womb. And those of you who joined us on Thursday morning for our minyan heard some of these explanations, and you're going to get to hear them twice. So there are various midrashic interpretations of what exactly this means to have her two children struggling in her womb. Some say that the two of them were fighting to divvy up the entire world, as would kind of be their destiny. Others take it a little bit more on a slightly smaller scale, and say that each time Rebekah passed a house of learning or a house of study or a house of the one true God, Jacob struggled with all his might to get out. And each time Rebekah passed a house of idol worship, Esau struggled to get out with all his might. And it really seems that from the time they were in their mother's womb, they were destined to be different. Yet, when actually describing their differences and their characteristics, the Torah uses pretty vague and superficial language. In chapter 25, verse 27, the text describes Esau as being an ish yodea tzayid ish sadeh, a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors. And Jacob is described as being an ish tam yoshev ohalim, a mild man who stayed in camp, literally someone who sat in tents. And not intense, I-N-T-E-N-S-E, but two words, I-N space T-E-N-T-S. He sat in tents. Interestingly, when the rabbis dig in a little bit more to what exactly the description of Esau means, a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, what they focus on in terms of this possibly being a negative description doesn't have anything to do with cruelty or barbarity or actual hunting, or actually taking the lives of animals, but actually they focus in on trickery. I can't say that I'm necessarily shocked that the rabbis view a rugged outdoor lifestyle as less than ideal, but still, their interpretation is that the way you hunt and track and trap animals is through slyness and deception and deceit. And of course, this doesn't actually have very much to do with animals or hunting, these character descriptions, but really it has everything to do with justifying how Isaac could possibly favor Esau over his brother Jacob. The only way that the rabbis can understand why Esau would be the favorite child is because of his skills in trickery, that he somehow deceived his father into loving him more or into presenting himself falsely. Yet to me, what's most striking about this characterization is that really Jacob seems like the ultimate man of trickery. Jacob will spend his entire life tricking and being tricked. What wind up being some of Jacob's greatest achievements, securing his father's blessing, amassing great wealth from his father-in-law Lavan, these are a direct result of Jacob's own trickery. And also his lowest moments, needing to labor for extra years to earn his beloved Rachel's hand in marriage, Rachel's death, being tricked by his sons into thinking that Joseph is dead. All of these low points are brought about by Jacob in turn being tricked by others. And meanwhile, as we see Jacob transforming into a deceiver, Esau actually becomes more Tom. he turns into more of a mild man than a wild man. His reaction upon learning that Jacob stole his blessing is to burst into tears, to beg his father if there are any blessings left for him. It certainly sounds like behavior we would associate with a more fragile character, not this big, bad, burly outdoorsman. The takeaway for me here is that maybe these two aren't quite all that different after all. Certainly as a literary device, this would seem to make sense. Twins can represent sort of a split personality, being two sides of the same coin, making it inevitable that sometimes those sides flip or merge or reveal themselves to be much more similar than we thought possible. And I think some of this sameness is exacerbated by Isaac's blessing in chapter 27, verses 28 and 29. May God give you of the dew of heavens and the fat of the earth, abundance of new grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow to you. Be master over your brothers and let your mother's sons bow to you. Cursed be they who curse you. Blessed they who bless you. As I said earlier, it's unclear what in this situation Isaac actually knows, who he thinks he's blessing, whether it's Jacob or Esau. But it doesn't seem to matter all that much. Despite how different we thought these two brothers were, the blessing could fit either of them. And it's possible, I think, in the end, that their differences only go as deep as their fair and smooth versus their ruddy and hairy skin. As I mentioned before the Haftarah, Esau and his descendants tend to become more and more vilified throughout Jewish history. His descendants, the nation that becomes referred to as Edom, the Edomites, come to be a later stand-in for Rome and Christendom at a time when Romans seem to represent the vicious war of brotherly nations that this Parsha predicts. Yet it's the sameness of these two brothers, not their differences, that ultimately offer us hope for reconciliation and universal acceptance. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who passed away just a couple weeks ago, writes that the conflict between Jacob and Esau arises out of parental chosenness and favoritism. Yet, he writes, the tragic shortcomings of the circumstances of Jacob and Esau shouldn't set the historical tone for the nations of Jacob and Esau. And I'd like to quote directly from his writing. To be chosen does not mean that others are unchosen. To be secure in one's relationship with God does not depend on negating the possibility that others too may have a different relationship with God. Jacob was loved by his mother, Esau by his father, but what of God, who is neither father nor mother, but both and more than both? In truth, we can only know our own relationship with our parents. We can never know another's. Am I loved more than my brothers or sisters? Less? Once asked, the question cannot but lead to sibling rivalry, which is one of the central themes of Genesis. But the question is not a valid question. It should not be asked. A good parent loves all his or her children and never thinks of more or less. Love is not quantifiable. It rejects comparisons. Jacob is Jacob, heir to the covenant. Esau is Esau, doing what he does, being what he is, enjoying his own heritage and blessing. What a simple truth, and how beautifully, subtly it is conveyed. It is one of the Torah's most profound messages to humanity, and how deeply, in an age of the clash of the civilizations, the world needs to hear it today. And obviously, Rabbi, then, our eighth graders were onto something a couple years ago when they let you know that they were convinced that each of their parents had a favorite. But I think, and what I think Rabbi Sachs is talking about here, and the message, his message that I'm glad to be able to share with you today is how we can overcome that favoritism. And the line that was most striking to me, and that I just want to read one more time, is love is not quantifiable, right? We don't need to only choose one side, to only give one blessing of the fat of the earth. We can really expand that. We can expand that in our interpersonal relationships. We can hope to expand that in our relationships with God, and also hope that that's the way God is viewing those relationships, from God on down. That there is more than enough love to go around, and that it's certainly not quantifiable or limited. And so I hope